Every relationship in life, whether between lovers, friends, family, or colleagues, stands on one invisible yet powerful foundation: connection. Before you can correct, teach, or even express your side of a story, you must first connect. People do not respond to logic until they feel seen, valued, and understood. You can be entirely right in your words and completely wrong in your approach. That is the tragedy of many relationships. They break, not because of lack of love, but because of lack of connection. When a person feels misunderstood, they stop listening. The moment someone feels unheard, they stop trying. Communication without connection is noise, but communication with connection becomes harmony. Connection begins with presence. You cannot connect with someone you are too busy to notice. You cannot understand someone when your mind is filled with assumptions, judgments, or pre-written responses. Real communication starts the moment you silence your urge to be heard and activate your desire to understand. In every disagreement, both people are fighting to be understood, but rarely do they stop to understand. That's where the bridge begins to crumble. When one person finally pauses and says, "Tell me what you mean. Help me see what you see," that's when the rebuilding starts. That's when walls fall and bridges rise. Think about it. Every meaningful relationship in your life became stronger, not when things were perfect, but when both of you learned to connect through imperfection. When you stopped trying to prove a point and started trying to feel what the other person felt, something shifted. The energy in the room changed. The tension softened. Because connection isn't about agreement, it's about empathy. It's about saying, "I may not see it your way, but I can see why you see it that way." That single line can heal what silence and stubbornness could never fix. We often forget that communication is not a battlefield. It's not about winning the argument. It's about winning the relationship. Many people enter conversations with their armor on, ready to defend, to justify, to attack, to prove. But the truth is, every time you speak from defense, you disconnect. You may win the point, but you lose the person. Connection demands humility, the willingness to put your pride aside for the sake of peace. It requires courage, the kind that allows you to lower your guard and speak from your heart, not your hurt. There is a simple principle that transforms communication: seek first to connect, then to correct. When you build connection first, correction is received as care. But when you skip connection, correction is received as criticism. You can tell a child, a partner, or a friend the same truth in two different tones, and one will heal while the other will harm. Why? Because one tone carries love, the other carries ego. People don't just hear your words, they feel your energy. When your words come from connection, they carry power. When they come from control, they lose it. Think of communication as a bridge between two hearts. Every word is a plank, every gesture a nail, every moment of listening a strong beam of support. But if you rush to correct without first connecting, you hammer that bridge with force instead of building it with care. Over time, the structure weakens. Small cracks appear, small misunderstandings, unspoken hurts, quiet distances, until one day that bridge collapses, not because of one big mistake, but because it was never maintained with connection. Connection also means being emotionally available. Too many people talk but are not present. Their mouths move, but their hearts are somewhere else. They're thinking about what to say next, how to defend themselves, how to prove they're right. True communication requires emotional presence, looking someone in the eyes and saying with your energy, "You matter right now." That level of focus has become rare, and yet it's the most healing thing you can offer another human being. There are people who speak beautifully but connect poorly. They have the right words but the wrong spirit. And there are others who say little but speak volumes because their presence carries sincerity. Connection has nothing to do with eloquence, it has everything to do with authenticity. You don't have to be perfect with words to be powerful in communication, you just have to be real. When people sense that your heart is genuine, they open up naturally. Even in moments of conflict, connection can save what logic cannot. Sometimes all someone wants to hear is, "I understand this is hard for you," or "I can see how that hurt." Those simple acknowledgments dissolve tension faster than explanations ever could. Because understanding softens the heart, and once the heart softens, the ears open. Every human being is wired to crave connection. It's the invisible language that tells us we belong, we're safe, we're valued. When communication loses that essence, people drift apart, not because they stop loving, but because they stop feeling understood. When you choose to connect before you correct, you tell the other person, "You matter more than my pride, my opinion, or my need to be right." That choice alone can turn an argument into alignment, distance into closeness, and misunderstanding into mutual growth. Connection is not a step in communication, it is the soul of it. Without it, words lose their warmth, tone loses its tenderness, and relationships lose their depth. You cannot save what you cannot understand, and you cannot understand without connection. The greatest communicators are not those who speak the loudest, but those who listen with their hearts wide open. When you master that, you build a bridge strong enough to carry any relationship through the storms of life. Words are among the most powerful forces ever given to humanity. They are not mere sounds formed by the vibration of air. They are seeds carrying creative energy. Every time you speak, you plant something in your mind, in the heart of another, and in the atmosphere around you. The words you release do not vanish. They take root somewhere. They shape thoughts, influence emotions, and even alter the course of relationships. A word can lift a soul or break it, inspire faith or ignite fear. People often underestimate the weight of what they say, forgetting that every conversation sows a future harvest. What you speak consistently becomes the emotional climate you live in. Think about how a single sentence can change an entire day. Someone says, "I believe in you," and suddenly confidence rises like sunlight breaking through clouds. Another person says, "You'll never make it," and that same light dims. The atmosphere shifts instantly. That's because words are spiritual containers. They carry energy, intention, and emotion. Long after the sound fades, the message remains, echoing inside the mind of the listener. Some people still carry words spoken to them years ago, words that wounded or words that awakened. That's the power of speech. You may forget what you said, but someone else may never forget how it made them feel. When we start to understand that words are seeds, we become more intentional about what we plant. You don't throw seeds carelessly if you care about your garden. You choose them with vision and purpose. The same is true in relationships. If you want to harvest peace, you plant gentleness. If you want loyalty, you plant honesty. If you want trust, you plant consistency. Harsh, careless words plant fear and distance. Kind, deliberate words plant safety and connection. The energy you release through your tongue becomes the emotional soil you and others must live in. Every relationship has its seasons of misunderstanding, frustration, or tension. In those moments, the easiest thing to do is speak. From reaction to defend, to blame, to vent. But reactionary words are like weeds. They grow fast, spread quickly, and choke out whatever beauty was once there. Once spoken, they're hard to uproot. That's why wisdom teaches us to pause before we speak, to ask ourselves, what am I planting right now? Because one impulsive statement can undo months of love, trust, and effort. Words can heal what wounds broke, but they can also reopen scars you thought were long gone. Our tone, too, is part of the seed. It's not just what times you say, but how times you say it. You can say, "I love you" with indifference, and it loses its power. You can say, "I disagree" with gentleness, and it strengthens rather than separates. The tone of your voice either waters the seed or poisons it. People rarely remember your exact phrasing, but they always remember your emotional tone. That's why communication requires emotional awareness. You cannot plant peace with angry soil. You cannot speak healing with a bitter heart. Before your words can bring life, your emotions must align with your intention. There's a sacredness to language that most people ignore. Words create worlds. Before any great creation, there is speech and ideas spoken into being. The same law governs your personal life. When you speak hope, your mind begins to align with it. When you speak gratitude, your heart begins to see more reasons to be thankful. When you speak life over others, their spirit rises. Communication isn't just transferring information, it's transferring energy. Every sentence is a transaction. You either deposit faith or withdraw it. You either build bridges or burn them. In moments of conflict, your words reveal your inner maturity. People who understand the creative power of speech don't waste it on insults or complaints. They know that every harsh word plants something toxic that will eventually grow back into their own life. Speaking with kindness is not weakness, it's wisdom. It takes greater strength to stay composed, to breathe, to choose words that uplift rather than destroy. Because words are mirrors, whatever you project eventually reflects back to you. If you speak in anger, you invite more anger. If you speak in love, you draw more love. Parents shape children through words. Lovers sustain their bond through words. Leaders inspire through words. Entire cultures rise or crumble on the foundation of speech. Yet, in everyday life, we toss words around without thought, unaware that each one carries creative potential. Every promise made and broken, every careless comment, every unspoken apology leaves residue in the emotional atmosphere of a relationship. And over time, that residue either strengthens or suffocates the bond between people. Words can turn strangers into allies or allies into enemies. They can ignite revolutions or reconcile nations. That same power lies in every conversation you have, no matter how small. When you choose your words wisely, you participate in creation, not destruction. Every time you say something kind, you release light into the world. Every time you speak encouragement, you breathe life into someone's fading spirit. And sometimes, the right word at the right moment can pull someone back from the edge of despair. People often believe that silence avoids problems, but silence is also a seed. It plants uncertainty when there should be assurance, distance when there should be closeness. Communication doesn't mean speaking all the time, but it does mean speaking with purpose. Say what builds, not what breaks. Say what you mean, but say it with love. Because words are not sounds that disappear. They are seeds that determine what your relationships, your life, and even your own self-image will grow into. The question is never whether your words have power. They always do. The real question is what kind of garden you're growing with them. Silence is one of the most misunderstood elements of communication. Most people fear it, rush to fill it, or interpret it as disinterest. But silence is not the absence of communication. It is a language of its own, often louder, deeper, and more honest than words. There are moments when speech can cloud what silence can clarify. In every relationship, silence reveals what words try to hide. It exposes emotions, intentions, and even the level of connection between two people. When someone can sit with you in silence and still feel understood, that is communication at its purest form. Silence carries presence. It holds space for truth to breathe. When you listen without interrupting, without rushing to respond, you give the other person the rare gift of being fully heard. You create an environment where they can unfold their heart without fear of judgment. Most people don't truly listen. They wait for their turn to speak. They hear the sound of words, but not the meaning beneath them. But real communication happens in the pauses, in the moments when you lean in, not with your ears, but with your empathy. Silence becomes powerful when it is filled with awareness. It says, I'm here. You have my full attention. You matter enough for me to be still. When tempers rise, silence becomes even more powerful. In the heat of conflict, words are often driven by emotion, not wisdom. Arguments escalate because both sides keep feeding the fire with words that wound. But silence, chosen with wisdom, can cool that fire. It allows emotion to settle, clarity to return, and understanding to re-enter the space. Silence does not mean surrender. It means choosing peace over reaction. It's the discipline of refusing to let temporary emotion destroy permanent relationships. Those who master silence during chaos gain the ability to protect connection, even in disagreement. There is also a healing silence that comes after pain. When someone has been hurt, words sometimes only make things worse. Apologies, explanations, and defenses may not reach the heart right away. In those moments, quiet presence speaks more than any sentence could. Simply being there without trying to fix, justify, or minimize tells the other person, I care enough to stay. That stillness creates safety, and safety creates the space for healing to begin. Some wounds need time to breathe, and silence becomes the medicine that allows them to close gently. Silence is also the language of understanding. When two people know each other deeply, they don't always need to speak. A glance, a gesture, or a shared stillness can convey what entire paragraphs cannot. In such moments, silence becomes the bridge between two souls. It's the invisible current of empathy that flows without sound. Words often limit what the heart feels, but silence has no boundaries. It carries emotion in its purest form. Lovers who can sit quietly together without discomfort, friends who can share unspoken thoughts, families who can feel each other's presence without explanation. These are relationships built on the highest form of communication. However, silence also reveals distance. When connection fades, silence turns from comfort into discomfort. The same quiet that once felt safe begins to feel heavy. It's not the silence itself that changes, but the spirit behind it. When people stop communicating emotionally, silence becomes a wall rather than a window. It's a sign that the bridge between them is weakening. The difference between peaceful silence and painful silence lies in connection. When love, trust, and understanding are present, silence feels full. When resentment, fear, or misunderstanding take over, silence feels empty. That's why being aware of what your silence is communicating is crucial. Listening to is a form of silent communication that shapes relationships more than speaking ever could. To listen means to surrender the need to be right, to suspend your internal dialogue, and to enter someone else's world for a moment. It is not a passive act, it is active empathy. When someone truly listens to you, you feel seen without having to prove your point. You feel respected without demanding it. That experience alone deepens bonds, resolves conflicts, and restores trust. The act of listening in silence becomes the loudest declaration of love and respect. In a world where noise dominates every space, social media, conversations, environment, silence has become rare, almost sacred. People are constantly speaking, posting, debating, explaining, yet few are truly connecting. Silence, when practiced intentionally, becomes a sanctuary where real communication can flourish. It teaches patience, humility, and sensitivity. It slows the mind enough to let understanding rise to the surface. It helps you hear not just what is being said, but what is being felt. In moments of reflection, silence also connects you to yourself. You begin to hear your own thoughts clearly, to recognize emotions that words have buried. Many relationships would heal faster if people spent more time in silence, not the silent treatment that punishes, but the silence that listens, that observes, that seeks understanding. It's in those quiet moments that truth often surfaces, that realizations dawn, and that empathy deepens. Silence doesn't compete, it complements. It gives balance to communication the way pauses give rhythm to music. Without silence, words lose their impact. Without pauses, sentences lose their meaning. The best communicators understand the power of a well-timed silence, the pause that allows another to think, the stillness that gives weight to what was just said. Silence amplifies understanding the way an echo amplifies sound. When you learn to be comfortable with silence, you learn to be comfortable with truth. You stop fearing emptiness because you realize that in the quiet, everything essential is revealed. You hear what the heart has been whispering beneath the noise. You notice what others are too distracted to see. Silence sharpens perception and deepens empathy. It trains you to feel before you react, to sense before you speak. And in that awareness, communication becomes something more than words. It becomes connection, compassion, and understanding in its purest form. Assumptions are the silent destroyers of relationships. They creep in quietly, disguising themselves as understanding, but they often carry misunderstanding, doubt, and distance. Every assumption you make without clarity becomes a brick in the wall separating two people. You start to think you know what the other person means, feels, or intends, and instead of asking, you fill in the blanks with your own imagination. That imagination becomes your truth, even when it's false. And from that moment, the connection begins to fracture. Communication turns into misinterpretation, and love turns into confusion. Relationships rarely collapse overnight. They crumble under the weight of assumptions never corrected. Assumptions grow where curiosity dies. When we stop asking, "What do you mean?" or "Can you help me understand?" we leave space for misunderstanding to take root. It's easier to assume than to investigate because assumption requires no effort. It feels comfortable to believe our version of the story. The human mind craves closure, and when it doesn't have all the facts, it creates them. That's how conflicts begin, not from malice, but from mental shortcuts. We assume tone, intent, and emotion without confirmation. Someone doesn't reply to a message, and we assume rejection. A friend speaks differently, and we assume offense. A partner withdraws quietly, and we assume disinterest. Yet most of the time, the truth is far from our assumption. Maybe they're tired, maybe they're distracted, maybe they're struggling silently, but because we never ask, our imagination becomes our enemy. Every relationship is a bridge built by communication. Assumptions are the cracks that weaken it. One small misunderstanding, left unspoken, can expand into distance that feels impossible to close. That's why clarity is love in action. To ask questions, to check your understanding, to seek truth before reacting. That's how relationships are preserved. It's not the absence of problems that keeps people close. It's the presence of open dialogue. When you replace assumption with communication, you invite honesty and eliminate confusion. Assumptions thrive in silence. When people stop communicating, the mind fills the gaps with stories. You begin to interpret someone's quietness as coldness, their busyness as avoidance, their difference as disloyalty. In reality, you might be projecting your own insecurities onto them. That's why self-awareness is vital in communication. Many assumptions are reflections, not observations. We don't see others as they are. We see them as we fear or expect them to be. A person who fears abandonment will assume rejection even when none exists. Someone who struggles with trust will assume betrayal at the first sign of distance. The problem isn't always what the other person did, it's what your unhealed emotions interpret. Healthy communication requires the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. It takes humility to say, I might be misunderstanding. Can you explain what you meant? That one sentence can prevent countless arguments and emotional wounds. But ego often interferes. Pride whispers, you shouldn't have to ask. If they cared, they'd explain. Yet love doesn't work through pride, it works through patience. People cannot read minds, no matter how long you've known them. Expecting them to is unfair. Assumptions expect perfection without communication. Clarity expects honesty and effort. One leads to disconnection, the other to deeper understanding. In relationships, unspoken expectations are another form of assumption. You assume people know what you need, how you feel, or what hurts you. When they don't respond the way you expect, you feel disappointed. But they were never given a chance to meet your needs because you never voiced them. Expecting others to understand what you haven't expressed sets them up for failure. You cannot be angry at someone for not reading a script you never handed them. Love requires transparency to speak what you need, to say what hurts, to share what you feel. Without that, assumptions turn small issues into emotional earthquakes. Assumptions also distort perception. You start to see situations through the lens of suspicion instead of trust. If someone cancels plans, you assume they no longer value your company. If they disagree, you assume they're against you. Over time, your mind builds a narrative that isolates you from the truth. You defend yourself against stories that never happened. Many relationships die not from reality, but from imagined offenses. The mind is a storyteller, and unless you keep it grounded with facts, it will invent fiction. Communication keeps that fiction in check. Asking brings light to what assumption keeps in shadow. To live without assumptions requires mindfulness. It means pausing before reacting, questioning before concluding. It means giving people the benefit of the doubt until you know the truth. This doesn't make you naive. It makes you wise. It takes strength to resist the temptation of your own narrative. It takes maturity to say, I could be wrong. Those 4 words can save friendships, families, and marriages. They show that you value truth over ego, that you would rather understand than be right, that you are willing to build bridges instead of walls. Assumptions don't just distort relationships with others, they distort the relationship with yourself. You start assuming your worth based on how people treat you. You assume their silence means you're unimportant, but often people's behavior reflects their internal world, not your value. When you anchor your self-worth in assumption, you become emotionally dependent on misunderstanding. Clarity, again, becomes the cure, the willingness to ask both others and yourself what is true. Many arguments that seem impossible to resolve could be avoided if both people stopped assuming and started asking. One simple conversation can dissolve weeks of emotional distance. It's not that communication is hard, it's that pride and fear make it hard. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of appearing weak, fear of facing the truth. But silence only feeds those fears. When you communicate openly, you reclaim peace. You realize that truth, even when uncomfortable, is always safer than assumption. Because assumptions don't protect you, they imprison you in a reality that may not even exist. Assumptions are invisible barriers that turn hearts away from each other. They make you react to ghosts of your own creation, pushing away people who never meant to hurt you. The moment you choose to replace assumption with curiosity, misunderstanding with conversation, and fear with faith, every relationship in your life begins to heal. The strength of any bond is not measured by how perfectly people understand each other, but by how willing they are to clarify when they don't. Vulnerability is the heartbeat of real communication. It is the bridge that connects one soul to another without pretense, without armor, without performance. It is the courage to be seen as you are, unfiltered, imperfect, and honest. So many relationships fail to reach their potential because people are afraid to be real. They hide behind pride, behind defenses, behind roles they believe will keep them safe. But in doing so, they lose the very intimacy they crave. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is strength in its rawest form. It is the willingness to open your heart, knowing that it might be misunderstood, yet choosing openness over isolation. When you speak from vulnerability, you invite connection. You communicate not just with words, but with authenticity. You're not trying to impress or manipulate, you're trying to share your truth. And that truth has a frequency that people feel immediately. Everyone recognizes sincerity when they encounter it. It cuts through walls, softens defenses, and creates space for genuine understanding. Vulnerability is disarming because it removes the need for competition. It turns conversations from battles into bridges. You no longer speak to win, you speak to connect. Many people fear vulnerability because they associate it with pain. Somewhere in the past, they opened up, and someone mishandled that openness. They were laughed at, ignored, or betrayed. So they built layers of emotional armor to protect the heart. But that armor, while it keeps out pain, also keeps out love. You cannot selectively block emotion. If you block sadness, you also block joy. If you block rejection, you also block acceptance. The price of emotional safety is often emotional emptiness. Vulnerability, on the other hand, allows you to feel fully, live deeply, and communicate meaningfully. In relationships, vulnerability transforms communication from shallow to sacred. It's easy to talk about opinions, routines, or surface-level details, but real intimacy begins when you share fears, dreams, and insecurities. When you say things like, "I felt hurt when that happened," or "I'm scared of losing this connection," you are no longer performing, you are revealing. And in that revelation lies power. Because when one person dares to be vulnerable, it gives permission for the other to do the same. Walls begin to fall, and hearts begin to meet. Vulnerability also builds trust. People trust what's real, not what's perfect. When you admit mistakes, when you confess uncertainty, when you say, "I don't have all the answers, but I care enough to try," others feel safe with you. They see your humanity and are reminded of their own. Pretending to be flawless creates distance. Being honest about your flaws creates connection. There's something magnetic about people who are open and genuine. You feel drawn to them because their energy is pure. They're not hiding. They're not pretending, they're simply being. True vulnerability requires emotional maturity. It's not about oversharing or dumping emotions without control. It's about communicating your truth responsibly. It means saying, "This is how I feel," without blaming or attacking. It's expressing pain without using it as a weapon. It's acknowledging fear without letting it dictate behavior. Vulnerability, guided by awareness, becomes emotional intelligence in action. It bridges the gap between expression and understanding, between feeling and healing. In love, vulnerability is the foundation of intimacy. Without it, affection becomes performance and connection becomes convenience. Many people long for deep relationships, but resist the exposure that depth requires. They want closeness without openness, commitment without honesty. But love cannot breathe in an environment of secrecy and guardedness. To love deeply means to risk deeply, to let someone see the parts of you that even you struggle to accept. When you allow someone into that space and they handle it with care, the bond becomes unbreakable. Vulnerability also changes the way we listen. When you approach a conversation vulnerably, you listen not to defend, but to understand. You become more sensitive to emotion, more patient with imperfection. You realize that everyone carries wounds, fears, and insecurities. Communication becomes less about being right and more about being real. You stop reacting from ego and start responding from empathy. And empathy is born out of the awareness that we all break, we all heal, and we all long to be understood. It takes great courage to communicate vulnerably because it requires the death of pride. Pride says, "I don't need help, I'm fine, I'm right." Vulnerability says, "I need you. I feel this. I care enough to show it." Pride builds walls, vulnerability builds bridges. Every time you choose to be vulnerable, you dismantle the barriers that keep love at a distance. It's not the grand gestures or perfect words that sustain relationships, it's the quiet honesty of two people willing to be transparent with each other. In moments of conflict, vulnerability is often the turning point. When both sides drop their defenses and speak from the heart, healing begins. Saying, "I felt hurt," instead of "you hurt me," changes the entire dynamic. It shifts communication from accusation to revelation. Instead of pushing the other person away, you draw them closer. Vulnerability diffuses tension because it communicates truth without aggression. It says, I trust you enough to show you my pain. That level of openness has the power to transform not just the conversation, but the entire relationship. Vulnerability is the bridge between loneliness and connection. People wear masks every day, hiding pain behind smiles and strength behind silence. But the human heart recognizes truth instantly. When you dare to remove the mask and speak honestly, you remind others that it's safe to do the same. You become a mirror of authenticity in a world that's afraid of it. Real communication doesn't happen between perfect people, it happens between brave ones. Those who are willing to speak from their scars instead of hiding them. The greatest gift you can give someone is the truth of your heart. To say, this is who I am, not what I pretend to be. Not what I think you want to see, but who I really am. That kind of openness builds emotional intimacy that no surface level communication can replace. Vulnerability opens doors that fear keeps locked. It turns ordinary exchanges into sacred moments of human connection. It reminds both people that they are not alone in their imperfections, not alone in their fears, not alone in their desire to be understood. Love is the most powerful language in existence, and it needs no translation. Long before words are spoken, love communicates through tone, through gesture, through presence. It is the quiet warmth behind every genuine smile, the patience behind every understanding glance, the compassion behind every act of forgiveness. When love is the foundation of communication, even mistakes become manageable, misunderstandings become lessons, and differences become opportunities for growth. Love turns conversations into healing spaces where people feel seen, valued, and accepted, even in their imperfection. It is not about romantic expression alone. It is about the universal energy that flows between hearts when truth and kindness guide every exchange. Every human being hungers to be loved and understood. At the core of every argument, every wall of silence, and every moment of distance lies this simple truth. People want to feel that they matter. Love is the answer to that longing. When communication is filtered through love, it changes not only what is said, but how it is heard. Harsh words soften, anger dissolves, and empathy grows. Love transforms the atmosphere of a relationship because it shifts the motive. You stop speaking to win and start speaking to connect. You stop listening to reply and start listening to understand. That shift alone can heal what thousands of explanations cannot. Love speaks in the language of patience. It doesn't rush others to change or to meet expectations instantly. It gives space for growth, room for mistakes, and time for transformation. When love guides communication, it whispers, I see who you are becoming, not just who you are right now. It acknowledges progress, not just perfection. That patience builds trust because it tells the other person they are safe to be imperfect around you. Without that safety, people hide behind defenses. But love has a way of melting walls, not through force, but through gentleness. It is soft, yet powerful, quiet, yet unshakable. In a world where so many conversations are transactional, love-centered communication is transformational. Most people communicate to get something: approval, agreement, validation, but when love leads, you communicate to give. You give understanding, comfort, reassurance, and presence. You become less concerned about being right and more concerned about being kind. You recognize that the heart of the other person is more valuable than the point you are trying to prove. Love reminds you that winning an argument means nothing if you lose connection in the process. Love also speaks through consistency. Words are meaningful, but without action, they lose their credibility. When you say, I care, love proves it through presence, through remembering small details, through following through on promises. Real communication is not just verbal, it's behavioral. People listen to your actions more than your words. When you consistently show kindness, even in moments of tension, your love becomes a language of reliability. It teaches others that no matter how difficult the situation, they can count on your respect and compassion. Forgiveness is another dialect of love's language. Every relationship, no matter how strong, will encounter misunderstanding and hurt. Love doesn't deny pain, but it chooses to rise above it. It speaks the words, I forgive you, not as weakness, but as wisdom. Forgiveness restores the flow of connection that resentment blocks. It allows the heart to reset, to begin again with openness rather than bitterness. Love-based communication refuses to keep score. It remembers that understanding is more powerful than accusation. Love also listens deeply. It listens not just to words, but to silence, to emotion, to the unspoken signals hidden between the lines. When love listens, it does so without judgment. It doesn't rush to fix, it doesn't interrupt, it doesn't assume. It simply creates space for the other person to be. That kind of listening is rare, yet it is what every soul craves to be heard, not as a problem to solve, but as a person to understand. When love listens like that, healing happens naturally. To communicate with love is to choose compassion over reaction. When someone speaks harshly, love hears the pain behind their words. When someone withdraws, love senses the fear behind their silence. It looks beyond behavior and sees the heart beneath it. This doesn't mean tolerating mistreatment, but it does mean responding with wisdom instead of retaliation. Love seeks resolution, not revenge. It aims to restore peace, not power. It understands that every person is fighting invisible battles and that kindness can often reach places where confrontation cannot. Love speaks through small things, through daily kindness, through remembering to say thank you, through offering comfort when words fail. It's not always grand or dramatic. Sometimes love is expressed in the quiet consistency of showing up, of choosing patience when frustration would be easier. Every act of consideration, every word of encouragement, every gesture of support adds another layer of connection that words alone could never achieve. Even in silence, love speaks loudly. It's in the way someone stays beside you during hard times, in the way they hold space without needing to fill it. Love doesn't need constant expression to exist. It radiates through energy, through presence, through the way two hearts remain connected even without sound. That silent communication of love is what sustains relationships during storms. Words may falter, but love's energy endures. Love, when expressed through communication, becomes a universal healing force. It bridges differences in culture, belief, and background because it appeals to something deeper than intellect. It speaks to the soul. It reminds people that they are more than their mistakes, that compassion is more powerful than judgment, and that understanding can do what argument never will. When love is the foundation, every conversation becomes an opportunity to uplift rather than to tear down, to connect rather than to compete. At its essence, love is a decision to see the best in others even when they show their worst. It's the conscious choice to bring peace into tension, to bring warmth into coldness, and to bring light into confusion. Communication rooted in love doesn't just express thoughts, it expresses humanity. It builds bridges where walls once stood and creates safety where fear once lived. It reminds every person involved that they are worthy of kindness, deserving of patience, and capable of change.